What's up, fight fans? Welcome to my living room. Check out the Christmas tree back there. It's nice, right? So about a week ago or so, I mentioned that I believe Joe Louis is the greatest heavyweight of all time, not Muhammad Ali, and that is an opinion that is looked down upon in boxing media. It's the minority opinion, and really all media. If you go against the grain that Ali is the greatest at this, and this, but especially the greatest all-time heavyweight boxer, a lot of people frown at you. But I asked you guys if you wanted to hear an explanation, a rant video, and you said yes, so here it is. Now look, I could talk about this subject for hours. I'm not going to do that. Maybe 20 minutes or so and just go over some key points, and maybe we can have a discussion here and I could do a few videos on this. But I will say this before I get started. A lot of times the way media works, particular sports media, but not just sports media, but all media, there's a narrative pushed that becomes legend, and the legend becomes fact. And if you really start to break down the actual facts and compare apples to apples, sometimes you start to break apart the legend a little bit. And I think a lot of what's told about Ali is legend. It's blown up and it's waxing poetic with the people that were around in that time who loved the man more so because of what he did outside the ring and some of the moments he provided inside the ring, which were legendary and amazing. But in comparison to, I think, Joe Louis, I think it falls second. So let's just look at their actual professional records. Joe Louis was 66-3 with 52 knockouts. Ali was 56-5 with 37 knockouts. So even though Joe Louis had more fights, he actually had less rounds, 417 pro rounds with a 75% KO ratio. Ali, 548 pro rounds, a 61% KO ratio. Joe Louis was a heavyweight from 1934 to 1951. That was his whole pro career. 6'2", 76-inch reach, so that was a good sizable heavyweight in that era. Nice long career there, about 17 years. Ali was a pro from 1960 to 1981, 21 years technically. 6'3", 78 inches, so good sizable heavyweight in that era. A bigger guy than Joe Louis, and now we see how much bigger the heavyweights are. They just continue to get bigger with every generation. Let's talk amateur career. Everybody talks about Ali's Olympic medal. He was Cassius Clay at the time. Joe Louis didn't go to the Olympics. He was 53-3 in the amateurs. He was light heavyweight champ at the Chicago Golden Gloves. That was a popular tournament back then. And he was the U.S. amateur light heavyweight champion in 1934, which the light heavyweight division in that era was 175 pounds. It moved up to 178 pounds by the time Clay/Ali fought in it. So it's just a 3-pound difference. Either way, both guys were light heavyweights in the amateurs before going pro. I find that interesting. The 1936 Berlin Games were coming up, and Joe Louis decided to go pro instead of going into those 1936 Berlin Games. A German named Herbert Runge ended up winning the gold medal, and Louis would have mopped the floor with this guy. So if Louis would have went to these Berlin Olympics, he would have won a gold. Him and his team, there was a lot going on with all the propaganda over there in Germany and everything, and they decided to get right to it and go pro. Now for Ali, there's a lot of misinformation about his amateur career, and you get different records. Some people spout hundreds of amateur fights, and there's all this stuff, but the confirmed number of amateur fights for Ali, these are confirmed fights. He was 37-8, but some claim he had well over 100 wins. So conflicting reports, but from what is confirmed, 37-8 is an amateur. National amateur champ in 1959 as a light heavyweight. Again, that was 178 pounds at that time. He lost in the finals in 1960, so he came up second. He was KO'd in the finals of the 1958 Chicago Golden Gloves tournament, the same one that Joe Louis won, but he came back and won in 1959 and 1960. He came in second at the 1959 U.S. Pan American Games, losing in the final. And then, of course, 1960, he goes over to Rome and wins the gold medal. So both had good amateur careers. Ali got that gold medal, but Louis had more confirmed fights. So toss-up, right? As far as pro careers, both had very long pro careers. Both stuck around too long. and both were legitimate heavyweight champions of the world in much different eras. Joe Louis's career is more about longevity, service to the sport. Ali's career is more about moments. There were these short little bursts and these great, great moments he gave us during a very strong era. So I'll delve more into that in a second. So some more stats here about Joe Louis, the longest reigning heavyweight champion ever, and this has been talked about, 11 years, 8 months, and 8 days. The only fighter who ever came close was Vladimir Klitschko, who was a full 2 years behind. Now here's a nuance. 4 years of that heavyweight championship run was in military service. And a lot of people bring that up. However, during those 4 years of military service, which was 1942 to 1945, Joe Louis fought in about 100 exhibition fights for over 2 million soldiers. And I'll get more into that in a second, because the civil rights debate that gets brought up about Joe Louis not doing much for civil rights, that's actually very, very false. And a lot of it relates to his time in the military. So I'll talk more about that in a second. But comparing this to Ali, Ali's longest reign was 3 years, 3 months, and 16 days. It's the 15th longest run in heavyweight history. To put it into perspective, Chris Bird had a longer title run than Muhammad Ali. Now, to be fair, Ali lost several years of his prime when he refused to go into the military draft and his license was taken away, right? So we'll delve more into that in a second. Both fighters gave up part of their prime for different reasons. But you hear again, the narrative in the media is that Ali lost 3 years of his prime because of his political beliefs and everything. But what you don't hear about is Joe Louis also lost actually a lot more time in his prime. He was fighting, but they were little exhibition matches. Only one of those exhibition matches counted on his actual pro record. But he lost 4 years of his prime as well for his military service. So both men lost years of their prime. So that's just a nuance and a wrinkle that I think should be noted. Joe Louis, most consecutive heavyweight title defenses ever, 25 in a row. The only guys who come close were Larry Holmes, who had 20, and Vladimir Klitschko, who had 18. The most consecutive title defenses Ali had were 10. Total combined, Ali had 21. So his combined total defenses were pretty impressive. But the most he had consecutively was 10. Tommy Burns, it's going way back, a Canadian heavyweight champion. He had more than Ali. He had 11 straight title defenses. So let's put that into perspective. Joe Louis was named the Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year 1936, 38, 39, and 1941. He was also the first active world heavyweight champion to serve in the U.S. military. And as I mentioned, he served from 42 to 45, about 100 exhibition fights right around there for over 2 million soldiers. Was used as a recruiting tool for the United States government, and not just for black soldiers, but for all soldiers. In fact, Joe Louis demanded that black soldiers be able to attend these exhibition matches. There were times where the CEO, the commanding officer at the base, or whoever was in charge of the exhibition match, would not want to let black soldiers attend, and Louis refused to perform if black soldiers could not attend. So the 4 years of his prime that he lost between 42, he came back in 1946. Louis was technically discharged I think at the end of 1945, but did not fight again until 46. The years of his prime he lost, he was 28 to 32 years old. Guys, that's as prime as it gets, especially in that era. Imagine, I want to say Anthony Joshua right now is in his late 20s. Imagine Anthony Joshua taking a 4-year hiatus right now, where he is at the peak of his career. That's what Joe Louis did in service to this country. So, as I mentioned, only one fight during that time actually counted on his pro record. It was in November of 1944. It was basically an exhibition match, but the New York State Athletic Commission chairman demanded that it count on the record because he did not believe in exhibition matches. I guess this particular match took place there under that jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction basically ran boxing at that point. Think of what Nevada is, that Nevada Commission right now in America, really North America. That was the New York State Athletic Commission at that time. Also, Joe Louis, he helped facilitate applications for black soldiers trying to apply to officer candidate school. And this is another thing that just gets lost among the media narrative, that Joe Louis didn't do anything for civil rights. Actually, a lot of black soldiers were trying to apply for officer candidate school, and racist white commanding officers would take their application and put it at the bottom of the list because they didn't want those guys getting promoted and becoming officers. Well, Joe Louis had a friend who was connected to that office. They actually went way back before the military, and he used that connection to help get black soldiers' applications back at the top of the list. Because what would happen is these guys, right, they'd be at the bottom of the list, a month or so goes by, they're back at the top, whoop, goes right back down. This application process is supposed to take weeks. It's ending up taking months. For some of these guys, it's taking years. So Joe Louis helped facilitate more black officers in the United States military. One such applicant that he helped in this process, Jackie Robinson. None other than the Jackie Robinson that gets credit in the media for breaking the color barrier in American sports, which I think is a false narrative. Again, a narrative that's become a legend, that's become fact. When in actuality, years before Jackie Robinson became a Major League Baseball player with the Brooklyn Dodgers, Joe Louis was an American hero for beating Max Schmeling and becoming the world heavyweight champion, beating Max Schmeling in that rematch in what I consider to be the greatest sporting event for America in the 20th century, if not the most important sporting event in American history, period, but definitely of the 20th century. So for me, it outweighs the Rumble in the Jungle and some of the big fights that Muhammad Ali had. And I do think that Max Schmeling was an underrated heavyweight. So anyway, just a little more there with some of the military service and the civil rights service that Joe Louis had. Talking about that Louis-Schmeling rematch in 1938, I still think biggest sporting event globally of the 20th century, definitely in America. Their first bout before, where Schmeling won in a crushing upset, it sold 88,000 tickets. It was a $1 million plus gate during the Great Depression. Think about that for a second. $1 million in that time during the Great Depression. Here's the thing about that first fight. Joe Louis was a pro for less than 2 years before he fought Max Schmeling, and he had just been on a run KOing everybody. Schmeling was the first really experienced, grizzled veteran he fought that was still very, very serviceable and took him seriously and went in there with a real game plan. A great learning lesson for Louis. President Roosevelt visited Louis's training camp during training for that rematch. The president of the United States visited training camp. Imagine that happening right now. Imagine the president going to one of Deontay Wilder's training camps. Probably wouldn't happen, right? So in my opinion, through that rematch, through that fight, I'm not going to get into all the political ramifications with what was going on in Germany and the World War and all this stuff, and the Nazi propaganda and all that. You guys know all that. It's been well talked about. But considering all that, I believe Joe Louis was the first black American sports hero, the first black American sports star to be accepted by mainstream America, or white America, Anglo-America, whatever word you want to use or term you want to use. He was the first. He was well before Jackie Robinson, and he paved the way ultimately for guys like Ali. But it wasn't just black athletes he paved the way for. Guys, he paved the way for people like Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano, who went on to kind of do, in a much smaller degree, what guys like Louis did and Jackie Robinson did to make black athletes more accepting to the mainstream culture in America. Rocky Marciano did that for Italian Americans in a time where Italian Americans were not generally accepted in the mainstream culture and seen as this mongrel race, this non-white mongrel race. There was a lot going on there. Louis paved the way for a lot of athletes, not just in boxing. It spread to baseball with his friend Jackie Robinson. By the way, they did become good friends after Louis helped him out with that officer application. And many other athletes of different ethnicities, he really, I just believe, paved the way for a lot more success to come. And he doesn't get credit for that. And a lot of people talk about Jack Johnson because he was the first black heavyweight champion. Yes, he was. But he was not a mainstream crossover star. He was seen as a controversial figure. Another thing about Jack Johnson is he ducked a lot of fighters once he became champion. He drew the color line more than the Irish, or not more, but just as much as the Irish champions in his era did. All the other not all the other, but many other Anglo fighters who drew the color line at that time. You know, it used to be if you were, there were several other types of other groups of fighters. If you were coming to America and you were Mexican, if you were Italian, if you were from other parts of the world, you had to fight the black fighters. But a lot of the Anglo fighters, when they became champion, they didn't do that. And Jack Johnson went right into that. Guys like Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, Sam McVie, those are guys that he actually fought for the colored title years before. But once he became the world heavyweight champion, he wouldn't fight them. He wouldn't give them a shot at the title. So that's something about Jack Johnson. Again, you hear civil rights. He kind of went against civil rights in that respect. And it's something that the media doesn't talk about. Jack Johnson won the world title against Tommy Burns in 1908, had a relatively poor title reign. If you look at who he fought once he was the world heavyweight champion, his best win was James Jeffries coming off a 6-year layoff. 6-year layoff, guys, and that's a century ago. 6-year layoff. So imagine that at that time, the way athletes age and everything, a 6-year layoff then would be like a 12-year layoff now. And that was Jack Johnson's best win. So put all that into perspective. I think that Jack Johnson's another one who did break some ground in some ways, abso-freaking-lutely. And you can make an argument that he paved the way for guys like Joe Louis because Joe Louis was marketed as the anti-Jack Johnson. I get that. But I don't rate him anywhere near the likes of a Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali as far as his exploits, what he accomplished in the ring. So for Joe Louis, wins over numerous former champions. And not all these guys were at their best when he fought them. Some of them were faded, but still. Primo Carnera, Max Baer, Max Schmeling, Max Schmeling is an underrated fighter. Max Schmeling was in the fight of the year 3 times, and he was the fighter of the year himself in 1930. Lewis also had wins over Jim Braddock, that's who he won the championship from, and Billy Conn, who is an all-time great light heavyweight, one of the best light heavyweights ever. I think Billy Conn is a really underrated win. I think they fought a couple times. So all in all, Joe Louis did not fight in the strongest era, but he fought the best of that era. And he was dominant for the most part. He had some losses. He ended up losing his last pro fight in explosive fashion, but he lost to Rocky Marciano, one of the greatest heavyweight fighters ever, who's on the top 10 of most people's all-time great heavyweights list, one of the hardest punchers pound for pound ever, right? So I don't think that loss is that bad. And then the loss, of course, to Schmeling, I don't think that loss is that bad either. Now let's talk about Ali. Okay. Ali, 2 years in, going pro after the Olympics, he beat a 46-year-old Archie Moore. And here's what I want to do with Ali. I want to really, really break down his career and talk about some of the stuff. And this is where I know I'm going to get some flack from some of you out there. Because the thing you hear about Ali is he fought in this amazing era, and he fought everybody. And there is some validity to that. But if you really start breaking down the nuance, you'll see that some of this stuff is, again, kind of become legend. Get down to the facts and you'll see it's not quite as amazing as some make it out to be. So 2 years in, he beats a 46, not 36, 46-year-old Archie Moore. Then he gets wins over Sonny Liston in 64 and 65. And of course, the Sonny Liston win was technically an upset, and he wins the title. Let's talk about Sonny Liston for a second. Now, for every bit of Max Schmeling, I think, being underrated, I think Sonny Liston's overrated. Sonny Liston is one of those figures that, again, it's become legend, that he was this dominant heavyweight who had this long title run, who was feared, who was this tough, menacing, skilled fighter, this hard, cracking puncher. Guys, Liston won the title from Floyd Patterson in 1962. One of the most undersized, chinniest heavyweight champions ever. A fine fighter pound for pound. But in terms of heavyweights, not one of the all-time greats. Sonny Liston beat Floyd Patterson in 1962 to take the title. He defended it once in 1963, then lost to Ali twice. He never again claimed the world championship title. He was a champion, Sonny Liston, for less than 1.5 years. He is extremely overrated as a fighter. Extremely overrated as a fighter. But because the media at that time was so in love with Ali, they rated that win over Liston, I just think, greater than it really truly was. And then there was the Phantom Punch in the rematch, and there's a lot of controversy around that. I could probably do an hour-long video on that. Sonny Liston had major ties to organized crime. And there was even rumors that some of the black Muslim groups and the black separatist groups and stuff had some ties into him in the rematch because of what happened in the first fight. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories around the Ali Liston fights, particularly the rematch. I'll just say this much. Ring has rated Liston as a top 10 all-time great heavyweight in certain publications. I don't know if they still do, but they did at one point in some of the older magazines. He goes down as this monstrous puncher, this dominant heavyweight. Look at his freaking resume, guys. Seriously. He beats Floyd Patterson in 62, defends the title once, and then loses to Ali twice, accomplishes nothing of note ever again. That's Sonny Liston. That goes down as this amazing win on Ali's resume and the beginning of this legend. And look at Sonny Liston. He doesn't rate anywhere near Max Schmeling, in my opinion, as an all-time great heavyweight. And some of you think that's blasphemy, what I'm saying. Look at the resumes. Look at the resumes. Okay, so after he gets the 2 wins over Sonny Liston, Ali defends against Patterson. Again, Floyd Patterson. This is the same Patterson who was a blown-up middleweight who had already been KO'd 3 times in his career, including his fight with Liston. Then he fights George Chuvalo, rugged journeyman with an iron chin. Henry Cooper, a rematch. He had already fought him once. And then his own Bum of the Month club. One of the narratives that's become legend and all this, and it's actually, there's a lot of truth to it. With Joe Louis was the Bum of the Month club. Sure, there's a lot of truth to that. But Ali had his own Bum of the Month club. Look at some of his title defenses, guys. There were some very serviceable, good fighters, good quality professional fighters sprinkled in with some of these bums, but none of these guys were elite level. None of these guys were huge, great elite level fighters. All you ever hear is that everybody Ali fought was a killer and would be heavyweight champion if they were fighting in this era. Brian London, Carl Mildenberger, Cleveland Williams, Ernie Terrell, Zora Foley. Now, some of those guys were pretty decent, just serviceable boxers, professional boxers. Some of them were crap, right? But none of them. This wasn't a murderer's row. That was Ali's title run, okay? Then he lost his license and a heavyweight championship in 1967 for refusing to enter the military draft, loses 3 years of his prime. So I told you about that reign. Not the strongest heavyweight reign ever. You'd think by watching movies and all the stuff you've heard that this was just a murderer's row of guys, but I'm telling you, compare apples to apples, that title reign to what Joe Louis fought, not a whole lot of difference. And I know some of you are screaming at your TV or your phone right now, but I'm telling you, go back and look. Ali returns in 1970, gets wins over Jerry Quarry and Oscar Bonavena. 2 rugged, tough guys, but again, not elite level fighters. They're just not. And I know some of you think that Jerry Quarry could come back right now and decapitate Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder in the same night and be champion. You need to get your head checked. Quit living in the past. That's not the reality. Okay. Then there's the dominant loss to Joe Frazier in March of 1971. The scores were 8 rounds to 6, 9 rounds to 6, and 11 rounds to 4. Most observers felt, there were media polls done, most observers felt that Frazier won about 9 or 10 rounds. So maybe that wasn't a complete domination. It was capped off by the knockdown, but it was a clear, decisive, definitive victory for Joe Frazier over Muhammad Ali. Frazier, really a Hall of Fame heavyweight. I think you could make an argument the best fighter that Ali ever fought. Really deserving of his all-time great rating, I think. I don't know if I quite put him in the top 10, but he's certainly on the bubble. He's right around there. Many rate him as an all-time great heavyweight. He accomplished a lot as an amateur. Olympic gold medal in 1964. Small squat heavyweight, 5'11", kind of the original Mike Tyson in that respect. You know, in this more modern era, a short, squat guy who used a lot of infighting, hooks, uppercuts, shots like that. Let me back up here for a second. Let's consider that this 3-year break where Ali was not licensed, where he lost his license. Let's consider that time that he shouldn't have been stripped, okay? Even if you think it's BS that he had his boxing license stripped, and that's a valid argument, that's fine. Let's stick with that. Let's say that during that 3-year reign, that adds to Ali's total title run up until the time he fought Joe Frazier. Even if you consider him champion from 1967 to 1971, while he didn't have his license, well, through 1970, he was champ for 7 consecutive years. Okay, that would have been from February 64 to March in 71 when you lost to Ali with 11 straight defenses against very, very limited opposition. So again, compare that length as champion, that 7-year run where 3 years he was sitting on the sidelines because he wouldn't serve, compared to Joe Louis's run and other heavyweight champions. Compare the 11 title defenses against fairly weak opposition to what Joe Louis did, to what Larry Holmes did, to what Vladimir Klitschko did. It pales in comparison, guys. I'm sorry. It just does. Look at the records. I'm not making this stuff up. Here's another thing I hear too. People say that Ali was past his prime when he came back from his layoff. I think that's a total crock. It's similar to the Mike Tyson excuses. Mike Tyson was past his prime when he fought Buster Douglas. Are you kidding me? Mike Tyson's prime was like 2 years in some people's minds. From 87 to 89, that was Tyson's prime. It doesn't work that way, guys. Ali was not past his prime or rusty when he fought Joe Frazier. He had 2 tune-up fights after coming back against Quarry and Bonaveda. So he had 2 tune-up fights before fighting Frazier. It's not as if he was sitting on his butt for 3 years and came right back to Frazier. He came back, had 2 tune-up fights, went rounds in those fights, then fought Frazier. There was no ring rust. He was also 29 years old when he fought Joe Frazier. 29! He was not past his prime. That is a media narrative that has become legend, that has become fact, that is false. He was 29 years old, had 2 tune-up fights before Frazier. Frazier was just better on that night and beat him fair and square. End the story. He was also in shape. I hear some people say, oh, I wasn't really in shape for that fight. He was 215 pounds in the first Frazier fight. He was in shape, guys. So after the Frazier loss, Ali has rebound wins over Jimmy Ellis for the vacant NABF heavyweight title, which nobody recognizes. It's just a local title here in America. Then he fights Buster Mathis, Jurgen Blinn, Mac Foster, Chuvalo and Quarry again, Alvin Blue Lewis, Patterson again, Bob Foster, former light heavyweight champ who had been KO'd by Joe Frazier 2 years prior, and Ernie Terrell 8 years prior, fights him. And then it has a split decision loss to Ken Norton in 1973. Again, look at that reign. Not exactly a reign of terror, right? Ken Norton lost in 1973. Judge Fred Hayes scored it 6-5 Ali. The other 2 judges scored it for Norton. Very, very close fight. Ali broke his jaw in that fight and bravely fought on with the broken jaw. One of those great legendary moments Ali gave fans. And that's one of those things. Fighters who had moments stick in the hearts and minds of fans and the media who write about them. And that was another one of those great moments, fighting on with such a strong fighter in Norton with a broken jaw. Most press feel that Norton clearly won. Associated Press scored it 7 rounds to 4 for Norton. And a media poll, most people thought Norton won the fight. Close, but Norton won. So they had a rematch with Norton later that same year, and Ali wins a split decision. The press was split on this one. A poll of sports writers ringside had 8 writers felt Ali won, 6 felt that Norton won, 1 had it a draw. The Associated Press scored it 6 rounds to 5 for Norton. Then he has a rematch with Frazier in 1974. Both were kind of getting worn down at this point. He wins a decision. Frazier had been KO'd by George Foreman, the year prior. So he doesn't get the freshest version of Joe Frazier. He had a version that was really, really bludgeoned by George Foreman. Nonetheless, clearly decisions him in their rematch. Then he fights George Foreman himself in 1974 in one of the great sporting moments of the 20th century. Comes back, the rope-a-dope, comes back to knock out this giant, right? Legendary. Will Smith made a movie about it. Ali, you saw it, right? Absolutely incredible performance. Absolutely legendary moment that people will be talking about for decades. But all things considered, bigger than Louis Schmeling 2, globally bigger than that. And I know it was overseas. The fight was over in Africa, and that made it a big deal. It was a global thing. I get it. But considering everything that was going on militarily and the world being at war and the symbolism, the first black American sports hero, Nazi guy, not that Schmeling was a Nazi, but he was being promoted as such by his media, against inferior race, quote unquote, right? I think that Louis Schmeling was a bigger, more important, more impactful sports moment than Ali Foreman. That's just my opinion. A lot of people will disagree, particularly the people who were working in the media back then, that old guard boxing media. Most of them are East Coasters with the Boxing Writers Association of America. They were young and in their prime, and basically the age I am now, they were at that age then, and they're always going to rate that fight as the greatest fight ever, right? If not the first Ali-Frazier fight. Okay, so let's look at Ali's second title reign. Sorry, guys, I promised you 20 minutes. It's over 30 minutes, but I'm almost done here. I told you I could talk about this crap for hours. Ali's second title reign from October 1974 to February 1978. 3 years and a couple of months, 10 defenses. He fights Chuck Wepner, Ron Lyle, a Joe Bugner rematch for some reason, a rubber match with a completely faded Joe Frazier, Jimmy Young, Richard Dunn, a rubber match with Ken Norton in 1976 that most ringside observers felt Norton won. One of the more disputed decisions of that era. Most people thought Norton got ripped off. Then he fights Alfredo Evangelista, and then a loss to Leon Spinks in February 1978. Let's talk about Spinks a little bit. Spinks was only a pro for a year when he fought Ali. He ended up fighting him twice. He was really still a prospect. He wins, he loses, then he goes on to be quite a mediocre pro heavyweight. He was a very good amateur light heavyweight, won the 1976 gold medal in Montreal at 178 pounds. But Spinks was by no means an all-time great pound-for-pound level kind of guy. 1 year in, he beats Ali. And then as after Ali got a gift against Norton, most people feel, in their rubber match. So again, guys, look at this second reign, which was only 3 years and a couple of months. 10 defenses, which is impressive, 10 straight defenses, although one of them was disputed. But look at who we fought. Look at when he fought him. Not the legendary reign that you hear about where every single fight was this all-time great battle between all-time great heavyweights. Not the case. Really, really not the case. So he defeats Spinks later in the rematch that year. He was in better shape. He was 3 pounds lighter for that rematch. I guess he took it more serious. Then he goes on to lose to Holmes and Berbick, and then he retires for good. So Ali, and I forgot to mention this before, I talked about Joe Louis, his Fighter of the Year accomplishments. Ali was Fighter of the Year. He was in the Fight of the Year in 1964, 1974, and 1975. And that brings me back to moments, right? There are some fighters, like, let's walk away from these two for a second and take it more to a more recent era. Everyone's talking about Miguel Cotto. Should he be in a Hall of Fame one day? Should he not? He lost his most important fights against the great fighters he faced, but he provided moments. Arturo Gatti provided unbelievable moments. He provided the fight the fight of the decade in the round of the century, right? That got him into the Hall of Fame. I think Miguel Cotto will go into the Hall of Fame because of the moments he provided. Ali, on top of being the best heavyweight of his era, and it was a relatively strong era for heavyweights. I think pound for pound, you could make an argument the 90s were even better. I know, don't shoot me, but you really can. But he was the best heavyweight of that era. He had some amazing accomplishments, but more than any of that, it was amazing moments. And that's what Ali's known for. And that's what's created this legend. It's that combined with his political stances, political beliefs that a lot of people in the mainstream media side with. You're talking, the mainstream media tends to go a certain way. That includes the sports media. That includes Hollywood, the entertainment industry. And Ali was a symbol for that. And so they rode along and everybody rode this train. And I think it's added to his legend and emboldened his legend and his actual ring accomplishment. And I think somebody like Joe Louis, because he was quiet, I know he grew up in Detroit, but he was from the Deep South. He was a country boy at heart. Had not a strange relationship with the media, but a very quiet one. Wasn't a boisterous guy, wasn't a media darling. I think that he gets downplayed and not respected enough. I think his exploits in the ring and what he was able to accomplish gets downgraded too much. And that's just my personal belief. The political stance, look, during this time, there was a huge anti-war movement in America. There was a huge civil rights movement in America. Ali was at the right place, right time, right personality, right face. He was articulate. All of that in the right place, right time led to him becoming a symbol for the media and for so many people in Hollywood and everything else to use to promote their agendas and their cause at that time. And I'm not here to argue whether it was good, bad, indifferent. I'm just saying that's what happened. Whether you agree with what all these people thought or you disagree, I'm not here to argue that or give my opinion on any of that. It's just the reality of what happened, okay? Another narrative that you hear is that Joe Louis became a pawn or a patsy for the United States government. The same government where the IRS, they were horrible. The way they were like mercenaries going after Joe Louis for tax money. So the United States government kind of screwed him over, yet he was a pawn for them. The government used him as a recruiting tool, right? For propaganda during the war to recruit soldiers when he was in the military and stuff like that, and to boost morale and things like that. And a lot of people say that Joe Louis was a patsy for the government and all that. I find that to be a little disrespectful, but I also think that you could look at Muhammad Ali and say that he was a patsy or a pawn for another group of people. Maybe not to the government, although he told the government, screw you, I'm not doing this, but he had no problem taking the money in this economic system, this capitalist system we live in, and earning money as under that system. So you could say there's some hypocrisy there. I'm not saying that, but you can make that argument. That argument's been made. But more than that, Ali was absolutely a pawn for the black separatist groups, the black Muslim groups, the Nation of Islam, that rode this guy, rode along with him as part of this gravy train, had him fighting on well past his best years, everyone taking their cut, all these hangers on taking their cut. This man, he was every bit a pawn or a patsy for the Nation of Islam that Joe Louis was for the United States military. And that's not a hard similarity to make. That's not a hard comparison to make. It's pretty clear. And the more you read about Ali, not the stuff you see on HBO and Jim Lampley crying in front of a camera about how amazing he was, but actually read about what the guy did, you start to see all that. And the people that really took advantage of this man, took advantage of him right until his death, if you want to be honest about it. Also, back to the civil rights thing. Joe Louis did a lot to help black soldiers when he was in the military, but he also helped break the color line in golf, of all things. Golf. That's something a lot of people don't know about. Joe Louis really, really loved golf. And when he started playing on some courses and in some tournaments, the people that ran those courses let him play because he was Joe frickin' Louis, right? But he'd want to bring friends. Black friends, and they'd say, no black people. We'll let you because you're one of the good ones, quote unquote, but no black people here. And he refused to play in tournaments if blacks couldn't play. And he helped bridge that gap in the sport of golf. And look, it sounds crazy, but you extrapolate that over decades and decades and decades, and you have a guy who's part black in Tiger Woods becoming the most famous golfer, if not the most famous sportsman of his time. Joe Louis helped pave that path for him, guys. He helped pave that path. And so the fact that Joe Louis didn't do anything for civil rights, I think that's extremely disrespectful. And it's something that's ignorant that the media propagates all the time. And then you can also look at Ali, who went out of his way to really, really demean other black fighters. Guys like Joe Frazier, who went out of their way to help him in times of need when he was really, really down on his luck. He went beyond the level of indecency, bashing him, and made it racial, calling him a monkey and all these other things. So civil rights, I don't know, man. Yes, Ali made huge stands for civil rights. I agree with you. But there was some hypocrisy there. He was a flawed individual, just like Joe Louis. What I find interesting is that there's a lot of comparisons with these two guys that the media doesn't make. Again, I mentioned the civil rights things, two different eras. And by the way, Ali called Joe Louis an Uncle Tom. He called Joe Louis an Uncle Tom, a man that absolutely paved the way for people like Jackie Robinson decades before him and paved the way for himself. He called this man Uncle Tom publicly while Joe Louis was still alive and ticking. Just absolutely terrible. But neither of these guys was a great father. Both these guys were womanizers. Both these guys were complex men with a lot of hypocrisy. Both of them had health issues later in their lives. With Ali, of course, it was with Parkinson's. With Joe Louis, he had some mental dementia problems and stuff like that that stemmed from some substance abuse issues he had. Both of these guys were used and abused by different entities. One, the United States government. One, the Nation of Islam, or the other Nation of Islam. So there's a lot of comparisons you can make here that the media doesn't talk about. They just kind of push one guy down and lift another guy up. And so I just wanted to rant for about 40 plus minutes here, even though I said it'd be 20, about some of this stuff. And I know that I'm going to get a lot of crap. I know that I'm going to get a lot of crap for this. But guys, these are just part of the reasons why I feel Joe Louis, who by the way is also black, although he did have some mixed ancestry, he had some Caucasian and Native American DNA as well. So maybe we can call him the first mixed race champion. But socially, obviously, the first black champion the first black sports hero in the United States. And I think that's huge for civil rights. Huge for civil rights. But more than any of that, I also feel that he was the greatest heavyweight champion ever. And I think that, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I know I'm going to get hell for it. Want to know what you guys think? Comment below, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff.